I think Matt can address that better. And then some livestock data, for example, that feed use for some livestock is very high in data that is being used today. In what ways are policies lagging behind scientific knowledge? Now, something that was discussed was that a vision for farmers is something that is lacking. They're fighting the trend towards less meat, and that it's important to support market smallholders. Their livelihoods are at risk, with the mention of just transitions, so to prevent the development towards only big-scale corporations. And affordability was also mentioned as an important factor, pointed out that what currently is maybe not the same as what should be, with the example of subsidies to feed grains are often very high in many countries, so changes could be made there. And for the third question, we discussed that it's important to take different dietary needs into account. For example, some countries actually need to increase their protein intake, so that's something that has to be addressed in the transition. And also how scalable and applicable is the data for different and diverse countries in terms of different diets. And then finally, not only doing the transition from the consumer side, but also pulling in the private sector needs and having them getting involved and engaged in the discussion to meet the consumer preferences in a changing world. And as someone pointed out, they often have very good modeling data, for example, for purchasing trends, and it might be interesting to think how we can work with them and take them into the discussion.
Great, thank you, Harun, for the wonderful and organized summary of our discussion. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to Sally, who was the rapporteur from the Science into Policy Action International and Domestic Strategies /NDCs group. There we go. And Sally, you're still muted.
I just unmuted myself. So in the NDC discussion session, we discussed what are some of the current policy limitations, as well as discuss what are some of the recommendations for going way forward. So in terms of the limitations, there are a few pointers that I recorded from the discussion. So first is the disconnection between policy recommendation and what happens in practice. And one of the participants used smart agriculture as an example. And the second limitation is the lack of climate policy looking at the co-benefit scenarios and the synergies between different sectors. And then a very important highlight is that we discussed, like in the current NDCs, there's a lack of focus on diet-related policies, and in some countries there's cultural or political resistance in pushing a very rapid dietary shift. However, dietary shift has a very significant potential in reducing a lot of the climate change impact as well as greenhouse gas emissions. And then just following up with that, we had some discussion related to the diet aspect in the NDCs. So we identified there's concerns of macronutrient of meat alternative products, and also there's also concerns about the nutrition value of indoor agriculture product right now within like from a population, like a market perspective. And there's also limited data in evaluating the impact between food options and the human health. And last but not least, currently from a food perspective, there's a lack of clear definition of what is processed food. And in terms of the options going forward, we look at the following options as listed in here. So first is to include stakeholders from earlier on stage and discuss how the implementation could benefit them. And second is to develop and model co-benefit scenarios as well as the intersectional impacts. And third option is to build capacities in country to evaluate the issue in a more fluid and multidimensional perspectives. And it's also necessary to generate location-specific policies and actions to address both mitigation and adapt issues within the agriculture sector. And we also discussed the importance of developed public relation education campaigns to promote more sustainable diet, while at the same time, it's important to take into consideration the need in certain developing countries. And last but not least, it's also important to make policies that impact individual health and realize there's no one-size-fits-all policy for all countries, and explore incentives catered for individual behavioral change in terms of shifting dietary patterns. And thank you very much. This is a summary of our NDC discussion group.
Thank you very much for that, Sally. And lastly, we're going to go over to the rapporteur, Kevin Carl, from the Energy, Ag, and Food Chains discussion. You're still muted.
Thanks. Sorry. Thank you, Matthew. So we had a very interesting discussion. I think the first issue we talked about was kind of how to advance food systems models, kind of getting beyond some of these data limitations and moving towards trend modeling that we can refine over time. So the main question there being, what do we need to explicitly model versus what can we present as a story or a trend to monitor over time. And then like the group had some discussion about how do we bring these changes in country income and lifestyles over time into our models, such as those that Philip was talking about, countries moving from lower middle income to higher middle income, and how do we bring that into all of the modeling that we're doing. One question raised in the group was how can we move away from just focusing on data to actually moving into policy action. One response was, the data is important because there might be some surprises. For instance, as we've learned, transportation may be less of an emission source than previously thought relative to something like energy use in greenhouses, for example, when thinking about embedded carbon in food. And then, framing the issue in this integrated food system way can maybe help break silos and draw attention to these issues. So maybe that does help focus moving towards policy action. We also talked about kind of this idea of component risk versus systemic risk. So, finding interrelated data that actually points towards, where maybe more vulnerable components of the system are that we need to prioritize. And there was some discussion in the group as well about how do we move this conversation towards helping folks change individual consumption patterns. That might be beneficial for on a range of topics. In terms of key data and modeling gaps, we looked at irrigated versus dryland emissions. It was brought up that more field experiment might be needed from dryland regions specifically, and that there may be somewhat of a researcher bias if a lot of these researchers are focused perhaps more on irrigated land. We talked a little bit about specificity in terms of emissions that are regulated by microbial communities. So if we had a better understanding of microbial communities, it could really help us get these emissions numbers right. And then that led into a conversation about, we need more diverse perspectives from a wide range of experts at the table, including soil microbiologists and energy experts, et cetera, when we're talking about food systems. So I left some things out, but that was some of the key points.
And great job on those, wrapping up those key points for the entire group. Thank you everyone for the rapporteurs and, really kind of cinching this last set of conversations for today. So with that, I'm going to hand it back off to Cynthia for closing remarks.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, rapporteurs. Thank you, breakout groups. Wow, it really did sound like there were three great discussions. For the wrap up, which we just have a few more minutes, I'm going to turn to David, Philip, because I think he's this, thank you, because you're here and really were able to stand in for Francesco, Matt, and then I will each give just like very quick, what are your take home points from our workshop this afternoon? David, you first. Final thought. Final thoughts.
I'm really impressed by the substantive dialogue that we just had. I mean, that was really striking how much material there is in those breakout groups, like you just said. And I want to review those slides and then follow up on many points. In our policy discussion, first it was great to meet some people that I didn't know. I hope other people made good connections. And it just really highlights for me what a rich and important agenda this is.
Wonderful. Thank you, David. Philip, is Philip here? Or he might have turned into a pumpkin.
I don't think he came back.
Good. Then Kevin, why don't we turn to you for final thoughts? Because you, building on what you just shared, but also your thoughts from the whole day.
Sure, yeah, I think it was great having a wide range of view on these topics. I think it really highlights, as we try to gain this food systems more holistic approach, it's important to stay connected to experts in a wide range of fields so that we can really develop a whole food systems range of solutions. And so bringing their different expertise into this project was really exciting. And I hope we can stay connected on this important issue going forward.
Great, thank you. Matt, your final thoughts.
So basically changing people's minds is hard, and dietary shifts really do involve changing a lot of people's minds, or at least changing policy in a way that is palatable to people's minds and behaviors. So a lot more needs to be done with engaging with policymakers, food producers, and the private sector, even food manufacturing groups, in order to make that happen. So big risks and big challenges for potentially big rewards.
Great. And now I'm going to give my final thoughts. First, I'm going to do the thank yous. Then I'm going to just give a couple of final thoughts. First of all, thank you to Carolyn, who is helping to organize the whole AgMIP8, and Eric and Maria and Alex Rain. They're really the home team that are making 5 days of this happen. Thank you to all the presenters, moderators, breakout group leaders, rapporteurs, thanks to everybody who participated. And finally, thanks to the participants who signed on. And for the great questions, and first of all, and the discussion at the breakout groups, and then for the great questions, which, as I said, we did answer a lot of them right in real time, but we are going to utilize them to develop fact sheets and FAQs related to the project. So your questions just are invaluable in many ways, and we will work on incorporating them in material related to the project. On what we're learning itself, one thing I want to give a shout out is for someone mentioned co-benefits in one of the report backs. So on Friday morning, we are having a workshop. It's the full AgMIP8 week is bookended by 2 workshops. This was one of them, and there's also in conjunction with the Global Research Alliance, which is a group focused primarily consortium of countries focused on mitigation. We're hosting a workshop like this, like getting into nuts and bolts on modeling the co-benefits of mitigation and adaptation. And that's the acronym is called MACB. So we invite you all to look at the AgMIP program at the agmip.org website, and please join. We're going to be doing regionally, but also we're going to look at the models. We're starting to develop protocols, and also having a regional panel and breakouts in regions to develop a set of pilot projects for that. So that's on the co-benefits, because definitely, yes, that came out today, this integration across the different components of the system, across mitigation and adaptation. We're clearly, working on becoming more integrated in but we need our methodologies to actually, I think, keep up. And then finally, I just want to, my final thought is, I really think we're doing this double helix. I think this project is a kind of a new double helix approach, that we're working on the technical aspects and the policy from the get-go, because before we had to do first, you're right, we did all the technical part, and then it was a lot of throwing over the fence. But this time, by having the technical folks and the policy folks together from the get-go, I think this is truly what's needed as we and the whole world really move towards implementation of climate change action. So with that, thanks so much to everybody for participating, and let's keep in touch. We will keep in touch with you. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.